In the summer of last year, I shared the full coding of my scalping EA. It got a bit of interest and a lot of people started asking me if they can apply it on Propfirm challenges. And my answer was no, because the codes were not written in a way that was suitable for Propfirm challenges. But it got me thinking if I can make the modifications and the tweaks necessary to apply it on Propfirm challenges. So today we will look at the modifications and the tweaks that I've made to the EA to make it more suitable for Propfirm challenges. I'm going to break it into two parts, otherwise the video is going to be 2 hours long. In this video, we're going to look at all the modifications and the tweaks and the additional features that I've added, including a panel to track our progress. And in a separate video, hopefully tomorrow, I will share all of the codings with full explanation and details. So with no more shenanigans, let's start. In order to find out if this scalping robot can even work on Propfirms, I created a new account separate from my regular one in order to just trade the scalping robot on that. I applied it on EURUSD, GBPUSD, USDJPY, Nasdaq, gold, and Bitcoin. The key settings: profile depending on whether it's a currency or other asset class on a 5-minute chart, starting at 600 hours and 2100 hours with 100 bars in. I explained the bars and in quite a bit of detail in my last video, so I'm not going to go over it today. Then standard settings for the forex pairs and these settings for the other asset classes. News filter on to avoid NFP, JOLTS, non-farm payroll, and interest rate, and only for USD currencies because that moves the market really rapidly. I'm applying the RSI filter, but not the moving average filter currently. And then if you look at the results, from the 1st of Jan until today, the 30th, the EA has made about 21% profit. Looking by pairs, we have 1% on USDJPY, 4% on gold with a big trade of $161, 7% on Bitcoin because Bitcoin has been in a very strong trend, 2% on GBPUSD, 5% on EURUSD, again with one big trade, and 1% on Nasdaq. Altogether 50 trades that are amounting to 21% profit. Let's look at the report. It shows the total from the mid of December when I actually created the account. We had a couple of losing trades in the beginning before I shut off the EA for Christmas and New Year. But from there on, the EA has performed really well. So there's $100 in 1 week of December and $1,000 in full month of Jan on a base of 5,000 euros. Well, not much to show in this step. Almost equal long and shorts. By symbol, as we saw, Bitcoin did very well due to a very strong trend followed by EU and gold. But most importantly, the drawdown, which was about 4% during the month. Owing to a very high win rate, so consecutive losses do not happen that much. We had one loss trade on the 15th of Jan and one on the 17th of Jan. These are the only two trades that went into losses in the month of Jan. Now I cannot claim that this is how the EA is going to perform month after month, weeks after weeks, and years after years, but it does seem to have the right profile for a Propfirm challenge. Now guys, I know a lot of you rush to the store to download it. If you're not even going to spend the next 12-15 minutes to understand the functionality of the EA and its most important settings, just rushing to download and apply the EA will be completely useless. The key reason that I said this EA cannot work on a Propfirm is because it requires an extremely aggressive trailing stop loss, which on my broker is not a problem because there is no limit to how close you can set a stop loss to the price. But many brokers do have that requirement, and a lot of Propfirms as well. And if the trailing stop is not going to work, the entire strategy is based on aggressive trailing, so the strategy is not going to work. So one key change that we're going to make to the EA is to check for minimum stop loss distance required by the broker. And if the user input is smaller than that, then we're going to override that input and use that minimum. So we know that the trailing stop loss will work even if at a slightly bigger distance. The second change we will make to the EA is to introduce a panel so we can track the progress on key rules at all times. And also to stop trading if a certain drawdown for a day has happened, or a certain drawdown for a week has happened, or a certain drawdown overall has happened. And we will have the ability to set these thresholds a little bit below the Propfirm challenge rules. So there is some safety margin, and if you want to change something, we still have room to do it. So let's take a look at this visually. Say we run the EA on Bitcoin. We start from the 1st of Jan until today. So we have to select the setting percentage of price profile, which you are familiar with from all of the other videos that I made on Scalping Robot. And don't worry if you're not, because we're going to go over the key settings in details anyway. We take 2% risk on every trade. We run it on 5-minute chart. And then at the bottom, you define all the Propfirm rules. You define when the challenge started, so we can calculate the weeks and the months correctly, because you might start the challenge in the middle of the month. And then you define the max drawdown allowed. Say if for a day, the max allowed is 5%, then we put 3% to give ourselves a little bit of buffer and safety margin. Then if for a week, the max allowed is 10%, then we set 7. And then we set the same 7 for the month, and then for the entire challenge as well. Say on the FTMO, the requirement is 5% max drawdown for a day and 10% for a month. So we keep the safety margin. Let's run a visual test so we can see how this entire thing works. The very first thing that the EA is now going to check is what is the minimum stop loss distance required by the broker. And if the input by the user is lower than that, then it will override with the broker's minimum. So we know that the trailing is going to happen, albeit at a bigger distance from the price. And then with the second modification, you can see the key stats in the panel, which is going to be on the screen. What balance did you start the challenge with? What was the balance at the beginning of the day, beginning of the week, which is then used to calculate the profit percentages at the bottom, so you know where you are versus the target. So how much profit today, this week, and overall. But more importantly, the equity high points. Because the drawdowns are not calculated versus the opening balances. They are calculated versus the highest equity points. So during the day, during the week, whenever we have hit a peak for that week, for that day, we store that point as a highest equity point and then calculate the drawdown versus that. So we look at today, the last 7 days, the last 30 days, and overall, which is the most important requirement of the prop firms. Managing the drawdown. And with the modifications, you have it here in the panel in one glance. Then the other setting we're going to change is the lot size setting. So before you only used to have risk as a percentage of the balance, but now you can define as fixed lots, as a percentage of balance, as a percentage of equity. So in case you have other open trades because of another year, the year also takes that into consideration. And then also as a percentage of free margin, because if you have other trades open on the account, then free margin is more relevant than the equity itself. Depending on what you select, you need to define as a risk percentage if you are using the risk percentage, either of balance, equity, or free margin. And then if you are defining it as fixed lots, then you need to define what your fixed lots are going to be here. And the last modification that we're going to make to the EA is for the trailing stop loss. Now in the normal scalping robot video, we have the trailing stop loss as an extremely aggressive trailing stop loss. So as soon as the price moves into profit, we start trailing the stop loss very aggressively until the price comes back and hits it. But then I've also added other types of trailing stop losses. The first time the stop loss is going to move is when the price moves into profit. So it will be like the normal default trailing stop loss. But once the stop loss has moved to break even, then you can select the default trail type, which is the aggressive trail type. But now you also have the possibility to trail the stop loss on previous candle. In case of a buy, it will be trailed on the previous candle's low. And in case of a sell, it will be trailed on the previous candle's high. And then you have to define here how many candles do you want to trail it by. So if you say 1, then it's going to be on the previous candle. If you say 2, it's going to be on the previous from previous, and so on and so forth. Another way you can trail the stop loss after it has moved to break even is on fast moving average. In that case, you define what that fast moving average is going to be. So there is a little bit more distance than just the last candle or the last from last candle. And lastly, you can also decide to trail it on the Ichimoku Tenkan-sen line. In which case, once the price has moved in profit and the stop loss has moved to break even, after that, the trading is going to happen on the Tenkan-sen line. I will share all the codes and explain them as best I can, but the panel, that is going to require quite a lot of coding, including all the MQL classes and stuff. But buckle up because it's going to be some effort. Now, before you apply this EA, you do need to understand what the EA actually does. So we need to look at the strategy as well. We define the last high and last low in the market, and then we place buy orders and sell orders. And when the price comes and hits those levels again, what we are basically banking is that the price is going to continue to move in that direction by at least another couple pips. So as soon as it moves in profit, we start trailing the stop loss extremely aggressively, which is the reason why the win rate is 90%. But this comes at a cost because the profit trades are going to be small and one stop loss hit is going to be larger. But what we're counting on is that with a high win rate, the small amount profit trades are going to more than offset that one big stop loss hit. And this brings us to the last key settings, which is the bar's N value, which is what we use to define the highs and lows in the market. So let's say if you put the value as 5, then the EA is going to try and find a price structure where there are 5 candles to the left and 5 candles to the right, all below the middle candle, and then it's going to call it a high. But if you put the value as 100, now the EA has to find a price structure where there are 100 candles on the left and 100 candles on the right, all below the middle candle, before the EA says that it is a valid high. So with a small value, you're going to get a lot of these highs, which is going to work amazingly well during a strong trend because you want to trade every time there is a new high forming. But when the markets are just simply drifting, then you don't want to be trading every small new high that appears because the price is going to take your order and then it might zigzag back to the stop loss before continuing again in the same direction. So with a higher value of 50 or 100, it's going to be on a more established price point that you place your orders, but there are going to be fewer trades. And on a smaller value, trades are going to be more frequent as the EA is going to continue to trade every new high that forms in the market. So it's a trade-off. Before we start with the modification of the EA, some of the very key settings that you definitely need to understand. The first one is the correct profile. There is the fixed pips profile, which if you select that, then you define all of the stop loss, TP, trigger of the stop loss, and the trailing stop loss here. And this one is when you're using the Forex pairs. And then there's the percentage of price profile to determine stop losses, TPs, and trailing, etc. And this is because other asset classes, they can vary in prices. So Bitcoin used to be $20,000, then $40,000, then $50,000, and now $100,000. So fixed pips on such varying prices do not make any sense at all. So for Bitcoin, gold, and Nasdaq, or Dow Jones if you want to use that, we use the percentage of price profile. And then we define the TP and the stop loss as a percentage of the price here, and then define the trigger of the trailing stop loss and the trailing stop loss as a percentage of that stop loss. So if Bitcoin was $1,000 when we took the trade, then 0.4% will equal 100,000 times 0.4%, so $400. So the TP is going to be set at 100,400 and stop loss at 99,600. And then the trailing stop loss will trigger once the price has moved in our favorable direction by 10% of the stop loss. So taking that $400, 10% of that is 40. So only when the price has moved more than $40 in profit, that's when the trailing will start. And then the trailing is 5% of the stop loss, so $20. So at any point in time, the distance between the price and the trailing stop loss will be $20 going up. And then the minimum order distance, because you cannot set an order here when the price is already above it. You need to have a distance to that order. And also we want to make sure that when we're sending the order, there is a distance between the order and the price. That's going to be based on 50% of the stop loss as well. So it's going to be $200. So the price needs to be $200 below that point where we are sending the order. Then the news filter is self-explanatory. So which news do you want to avoid and on which currencies? So for example, interest rate on USD. Then the RSI filter is to stop trading when the price is in extreme condition. So when the RSI is above 80 or below 20, on a higher time frame chart such as 4 hours, we stop trading because now the markets can be very chaotic. And then the same for the moving average filter, but in a different way. So it looks at 200 EMA. And then we say what percentage the price needs to be away from that moving average, up or down. Let's say 3%. So if the price is that far away from the moving average, it is in an extreme condition and we don't want to be trading further, because it might revert back. Then the trading allowed by day, which is not so relevant for Forex pairs, but say Bitcoin trades over Saturday and Sunday as well, and you might not want to trade it because of lower liquidity. And lastly, the Propfirm settings. So what's the initial balance when you start the challenge? Because if you turn off the EA in the middle and then reapply it, the EA doesn't know where you started. What is the profit target? So the EA stops when it has reached that profit so as not to lose anything after that. Then what's the start date of the challenge? Because we need that to calculate the 7-day drawdown, the month drawdown, etc. And if you started the challenge in the middle of the month, the EA needs to know that. And then the max drawdown settings for the challenge, best to keep them below the actual requirements so the EA stops with a little bit of a safety margin in case you want to make some changes. Now guys, I do have to say that I do not use Propfirms myself. I don't really see a point. I have traded myself over the years and grew a customer base and thereby a fund that I manage. Also, I believe that the business model of the Propfirms is completely based on you paying for the challenge and then losing. That's where their profits come from. Much like the video that I made on the brokers and how they stack up everything against you, I believe the Propfirms do the same, banking on you to lose the challenge so they can keep the money that you paid. And their funded accounts are probably not even funded accounts. These are just virtual accounts, as they believe that even if you pass the challenge, you will probably blow up the account anyway. But with all that said, here are the modifications required to make this scalping robot more suitable for Propfirm challenges as well, because a lot of people do want to use it. And I will share the coding of the modifications with full explanations in a video I'm going to be probably releasing tomorrow. So until then, stay safe, trade safe.